Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We're back with another innovator interview. It's with Jeff Gold. He's the founder and CEO of nexus-fuels, which is developing a circular economy in plastic, both in terms of delivering plastic, molecular plastic, basic materials for reuse and to use to make fuels. So I want to start this by sharing a story. A few years ago, I was at a recycling conference, and the most unlikely person in the world described the most radical recycling program I'd ever heard. And why was he unlikely? Because he worked for the Koch brothers, who are not friends of the environment. But he said, the Koch brothers, who own Georgia Pacific Paper, are trying to take paper and break it down to the molecular level so that you have all this material that can then be recombined to make new complex molecules and paper and other things from them. And I thought, wow, what? The Koch brothers are on the cutting edge of molecular recycling. Well, today, I want to talk with Jeff about what nexus-fuel is doing, which is taking a molecular approach to plastic recycling. They break plastic down into the basic hydrocarbons that you find in petroleum and from which the plastic was originally made. It's the leading edge of chemical technologies for creating a circular economy. Nexus combines waste management and energy production using plastics number 2, number 4, number 5, and number 6 to make feedstock, the raw materials, for new plastic or fuel. And their molecular recycling approach is already processing 50 tons of plastic a day to provide fuel-making materials to large oil companies. Now, that's 50 tons of plastic diverted from landfills. And if we could expand plastic recycling, the molecular recycling approach promises to reduce the need for virgin oil to keep up with demand, both for plastics and fuels. Jeff, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, Mitch. I appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, I want to start off by asking about your background in the founding of nexus-fuels. When did you start the business, and why was pyrolysis, which is the process you use, and which has a really controversial history, the right foundational technology for your company?
Well, I think this goes back quite a ways. My whole professional career has been in the environmental business. I actually own an environmental remediation company and have been running that for about 30 years. And we do some very interesting things. We deal a lot with chemical weapons and biological weapons, and we deal with technologies in terms of neutralizing these things and taking them off the planet. My goal, I think, as a human and as a part of this planet has always been to try to make it a better place and leave it a better place than the one we came into. And to that end, we've been trying to eliminate some of the more hazardous materials off the face of the earth. Now, Nexus was started in 2008, kind of just as a twinkle in the eye, I guess you might say. And I came up with the idea after reading an interesting article, kind of like your experience was with some of these things, about a company in Switzerland that was taking plastic bags and converting them into oil. And I had this same aha moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes a lot of sense. Like it can actually happen chemically. And so I said, wow, this sounds amazing. And so it was really just intellectual curiosity that got this thing going. I had the resources at my other company to do a lot of research and the equipment to handle the investigation that would be needed. So we started with this. And, we were originally measuring production in drops. We would count the number of drops of oil that we would get out of a little experiment. And we were like, oh my gosh, we can take plastic, heat it up like this and actually get oil, and we can get gas. And it was just an amazing experience, and just a very rewarding one, I have to say, because even as a kid, I remember having plastic toys and thinking, they would break, of course. And you'd say, I know this stuff doesn't really go away. I wonder what really happens to this over time. Mm-hmm. And it was always kind of stuck with me, like, this is probably not a great thing not to ever go away. And that kind of carried through, and then had the opportunity to learn about this technology called pyrolysis. And as you said, pyrolysis has a bit of a checkered past. It's been around for, ages and ages. It's been used in a lot of different industries, but as applied to plastics, they started looking at this back in the 1960s, built a few facilities that could actually take plastics along with tires and other things and pyrolyze them into product. But it never went anywhere because it was not economic. And back then in the 60s, oil was selling for, pennies on the gallon. And so it wasn't really economical. And then more recently, it's got also a checkered past. What we've seen in this business and in this industry are companies that come in, they have this idea, and again, they come in for different reasons, and we're not here to talk about that. But it's been one where the success rate has been very low. And again, it all boils down to the economics, to the business aspect of this. For this to be sustainable, and here to, be in business today, tomorrow, and 10 years from now to continue doing this work that we're doing, you have to have an economic or business model that allows it to be sustainable. And so we went into it with the idea in the early days of coming up with a way that we could make this really, really energy efficient, because we knew that energy efficiency translates directly into economic efficiency. And so we did this. We took it one step at a time, a very methodical, very systematic approach to doing this. Just very scientific approach, really. And we met with success at one level. We then take it to the next level, and then the next and the next. We ran a pilot plant for 4 years to try to get enough data to say, is this really viable? Can this really, really work? And determined, yes, it could. And at that time, we were able to obtain an investment and brought us to the place we are now. We built this, as you mentioned, a 50-ton per day plant in Atlanta, Georgia, and have been running it now for a couple of years. It's really a demonstration plant is what it is. So it wasn't ever really designed as a full production plant. It was meant to teach us what we needed to know to make this at a commercial scale, and it's done just that. So that's a little bit of the history there. And as you mentioned, we've created about 350,000 gallons of product, and we've diverted about 3 million pounds of plastics that would normally have gone into the landfill, out of the landfill, and into a product that is being used today exclusively for creating new virgin plastics. In the beginning, as our name implies, nexus-fuels, we thought the fuel business was going to be the way to go. That never really sat well with me, even in the early days, because, as a fuel, it gets burned and it's going to contribute to.
Once again, you're back to pollution.
Exactly. I mean, greenhouse gases and climate change is our biggest challenge today as a civilization. And, I certainly didn't want to be part of the problem. We could solve one problem, the waste, of plastics and the pollution that plastics can cause when mishandled. I didn't want to create, more problem on the back end. So what we feel now we've got today with our partners that are taking this material is making new virgin plastic. So we're taking plastics out of the environment and sequestering that carbon. It's not going into the environment. It's not going into the atmosphere. And it's being used to make new plastics that can then, again, be recycled infinitely. And as you said in the beginning of the discussion here, it's a circular economy. It's literally a circular path this plastic can follow.
Now, there's a great video on your site that explains exactly how rigorous your process is and how tightly designed to contain all the material. And that's at nexus-fuels.com, and we'll provide a link to that video in the article that goes with the podcast, folks. But Jeff, what are the pollutants or byproducts of the process, and do you capture those to prevent those from going into the atmosphere?
For the most part, yes. The process itself. Now, here's where a lot of confusion comes in. People think that whenever you heat plastics, it's going to burn and it's going to make dioxins and it's going to create all these hazardous chemicals. And when plastics are burned or incinerated, that is in fact the case. With pyrolysis, however, the whole process is designed around the idea that you're heating this material in the absence of oxygen. And as a result, you're not burning it. You're not getting these very toxic byproducts. So the process we have is totally enclosed. It's a closed loop system. So whenever we put that plastic in there, it's heated. It then breaks down in the polymer, the plastic polymer. Those chains are all, we basically take scissors, and those scissors are heat. And we chop up those long chains and make them into small chains. And when those cool again, when they condense and cool, that's what forms oil and waxes, and in some cases, non-condensable gases like propane and ethane. And all that material, all of it is captured. It's valuable to us. So the oil and the wax product are the products that we make and we ship off, and those are then handled by a refinery where they are made into the new plastics. The gas products, the ethane and the propane, the butane and things, we capture every bit of that because it's very valuable to us. That is then routed back to our reactors where it is heated, it's combusted, that is combusted, and it provides the heat for us. Now, the combustion of those products, that material, the carbon monoxide, the carbon dioxide, those things are emitted, but we are way, way below the threshold limits for any sort of industrial facility and way below the permit requirements. In Atlanta, for instance, Atlanta is what's known as a non-attainment area because we have so many cars and so many people, so it does not attain the clean air standards. So anybody that's siting a facility like ours there has to meet very stringent air emission requirements, which we do. But that is the only product. We emit the same products that you emit when you go out to your backyard grill and turn that on and cook your food on there. It's the same exact products emitted from that process that we emit in our process. So there's nothing particularly hazardous about that.
Now, one of the first ways that we learned about this process was the Hefty Energy Bag program. And you're a partner with Dow Chemical, that makes Hefty bags, in Cobb County in Georgia.
That's correct.
How has that program developed over time? Are you expanding, and do you see the collection of materials through the Energy Bag program growing?
Yes, it is growing. We had a meeting, in fact, fairly recently with them, and they were announcing, or getting ready to announce rather, some expansion plans on that, not only within Georgia, but in other locations as well. That program, they're kind of taking it at a slow pace. They're putting their toe in the water and seeing how it's working. They're trying to get people educated in terms of how to use these bags. And that program has followed an interesting evolution. It started out and they had a lot of issues with it because people didn't know how to use the bags. These are people that are dedicated consumers. But, if you have this bag in your house and you have kids or something, the kid, they don't know that it's a special bag and supposed to be used for certain things. So they're throwing this and that and the other thing in there. Now, over time, though, we've seen dramatic improvements in the quality of the material that comes in there. So these bags, for your listeners to know, these are bags that are intended to be receiving material that doesn't normally go into your curbside collection bin. So these are plastics. These are maybe your food packaging and things that, your dry cleaning bags, any of the film plastics go into this bag. But to get people to understand that was all, that's been taking some time, but it has, as I mentioned, dramatically improved. And so now we're taking materials in on a very regular basis through that program, and they go right into our mix. They go right into our feed that goes into our system and comes out as great quality oil.
So that raises a whole issue of contamination, and Earth911 works all the time to help people understand what to put into the curbside and into the transfer station. So the wrong plastic or food or moisture in that bag can mess up the entire process. How do you educate the consumer through the Hefty Bag program what goes in each of the repositories that they have around the house?
Well, it's a process, and it's a long process. It's a matter of continuously providing the same message over and over, whether that be in written form or through just communications through advertising and things like that. So it's a process where people will bring the bags in, and we try to give them feedback. The Dow program there is trying to get folks feedback, saying we're doing well this month. Last month was not so good, but you're improving. And here's why. And they say, we got in, this much plastic, but we had this much material that wasn't compatible. And as you said, things like, moisture and food. We get things in there that are, for instance, clothing. We get lots of textiles in there. We get clothing. We get old shoes. We get Brita water filters people put in there, and they would love to see these things get recycled, as would we. but it's not compatible with what we're doing or what that program is about. So the contamination, when people put the wrong things in there, has a dramatic effect on the whole recycling program, whether it's the Dow program or whether it's the local recycling facility. It makes life very, very difficult when people put in things that are not compatible with what they're asking for at the recycling facility. And that's a whole nother issue, but it's a very important one.
Well, Earth911 did a test of on-demand recycling where we did that feedback. It was right before the pandemic, so we never launched it in a bigger way. But we did find that people loved getting the feedback and were trying, and we were seeing improvement in what we collected as a result of that feedback. So it's clear that if you get the right information to consumers, that they can participate in this process. Now, your site explains that you can pay for plastic and still be profitable. Have you explored ways to incent consumers and businesses to provide a cleaner stream of recyclable plastic?
Yeah, it's a hard one to do because people, again, they want to be able to recycle. And there's, most people want to do this. They want to recycle. They want to see their products being reused. I mean, look, aluminum cans get recycled at a huge rate. It's great. Plastics, not so much. Mm-hmm. And I know that people, especially your listeners, really want to do a good job with this. So how do you incent people to do this? Well, I mean, one thing, of course, is economics. But as you just said, one of the biggest ways to incent people is to provide feedback. Let them know this is working, this is not working. Hey, you did a good job, or you need a little improvement here, and this is why. So we have modeled our business on having to pay for this material. And we do that because we want to be able to get people to provide the material that we can use and make it so there's no penalty or no tax, for instance, on them to do that, or no cost to them to do that. And so by us being able to pay up for this material enables people to contribute to this as easily as possible. There's a program in Atlanta that's been done on a small scale. I think it's called Feet on the Street, where folks go around and they literally go to the curbside bins and they take a look inside and they say, "Oh, this is fine. This is fine." If it isn't, if they find things in there that are not good, they'll put a little sign that says, "Oops, here, check this," and they don't pick the bin up. Well, it only takes one or two times for that to happen, and the quality of that material improves dramatically. And so the folks learn, what they need to put in and what they don't need to put in, and that's had a huge effect. And it's something that if we can roll out on a bigger scale, everyone will be much happier about it. The consumers will, the recyclers will. Most of the material we take is actually at this point in time post-industrial. It is film plastic, and it's simply because the post-consumer material that is available is simply very, very contaminated still at this point in time. So we have a long way to go, but we're very optimistic that we will get there. In Europe, for instance, they've been able to do this, but they're a bit ahead of the U.S. in terms of that.
Well, and the contamination rate, even during the pandemic, when people have been spending more time in recycling, remains stubbornly high. One of the things we need to share, though, is the idea of what your action creates in terms of new value in society. So let me ask a couple of just practical questions. Can the plastics made from the product of your molecular recycling process be used in food grade packaging and films so that people would know, like an aluminum can, that after a few weeks or months, they're going to get the same material back, but in a new form?
It could be. Exactly. The product that's made, and the distinction here, and you pointed it out early in the talk, Mitch, is that this is molecular recycling. We are literally breaking the material down into its molecular form, and those molecules are what are being recycled. It's not a chunk of plastic that's being remelted. This is literally breaking down into molecules that are then reformed, recombined to make new plastics. And in that respect, it is perfectly fine for food packaging. It is identical in every way, physically, chemically, structurally, to virgin plastic. So it is absolutely no different than the original food packaging. And the beauty of this is that, for instance, you just said it, you can take that same packaging, recycle it again, have it go through this process, and have it come out the backside and make brand new product again and again and again. And that's the real magic, and that's the real promise of chemical recycling.
So we recently had a conversation with Sarah Dearman with the Recycling Partnership, and she made an interesting statement. We need to simplify our plastics system. You guys are doing number 2, number 4, number 6, number 5 and number 6 plastic recycling. But plastic number 7 as a category is just, it's the catch-all for everything invented after the numbers were presented. Does all of the innovation around specialized plastic actually make this process, the processing of this material, more complicated?
I'm afraid to say that yes, it does. When you have, as you said, the number 7 category, that's the catch-all. Those are nylons, they're urethanes, they're polyacrylates, they're all these different chemicals. And plastics, I never knew this before getting into this, but plastics are just, a world unto themselves. And there is a huge variety. Even, for instance, for film plastic, you think of film, you get your dry cleaning in a bag, or you go to the grocery store and you get a bag. Well, that plastic may have up to 10 layers in it, right, and depending on its purpose. Most, some of the food packaging is one of the more complex stuff, but there's additives in there, there's colorants, there's stabilizers, there's UV retardant chemicals that go into it. So plastics are incredibly complex. So even within the 2, 4, 5s, and 6s, you get some variety. You add that into the 7s, and you've got an issue. So to your point, can we simplify it? We would put as much emphasis on that as we possibly could, because it would make our life easier. It would make all recycling easier. If the brand owners, there's a huge part of this that falls into the brand owners' lap, the manufacturers, to make plastics that are more easily recyclable. Up until now, the focus has been to make materials that are, suited to the function they're going to have, whether it be in an automobile, whether it be in a computer, whether it be in the food packaging industry. You wanted to make the products that were the most suited to that practice. What they're learning now is they can do that, but they can now also make them easier to recycle, make it easier for the consumer to understand, this is good and this is not. And there's a whole relabeling initiative underway. Brand owners, we're talking to brand owners almost daily, and they're asking us, what can we do to help with this? We want to make this easier to do. We want to make it easier for you, Nexus, and we want to make it easier for our consumers to take our product and give them a responsible end of life. Here's the other thing people don't understand. We're throwing away $80 to $120 billion worth of plastics every year. We put them in the ground. We spend all this money and we emit, all this pollution really to get it out of the ground and transported and then refined and then put into the original plastics form. And we then use that in the case of, for instance, a plastic bag for average of, I think, 12 minutes.
The modern economy is the most advanced wasteful system in the universe.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
It just doesn't have to be that way. And this is the revolution that we're trying to promote and bring about, because it doesn't have to be this way. No one benefits long term from this. And we really, everybody has a role in this, all the way from each individual consumer who can make a difference, all the way up to the big oil companies. And they, I have to say, they have a very bad reputation, and much of it well-deserved in some cases. But we are working with some fine people in those groups that are really dedicated to making this happen and trying to help the environment and improve the situation.
Well, we can only hope that those activist members of those communities will be successful. But one of the other trends is a focus on bioplastics. So if we move to more bioplastic material, does your process work with it?
Well, here's an interesting thing about bioplastic. The short answer is no, it doesn't. And there's a very simple reason. It's a chemical reason. Most bioplastics are made of materials that are heavily oxygenated molecules. And I don't want to get into the weeds on the molecules here, but as I just said earlier, pyrolysis works by emitting or omitting rather oxygen. So when you put in chemicals that have a lot of oxygen in them, it's not a good thing, and you end up with char versus oil. So we don't.
Right, it oxidizes.
It oxidizes. That's exactly correct. So bioplastics are not a good match for us. The other thing with bioplastics is it confuses the recycling systems where these are supposed to be sorted out. So that ends up being thrown out. Now, bioplastics, and this is also something people don't really think about here. They think, wow, they decompose and they degrade. That's great, which it is, in that they don't end up littering in our environment. However, when things like that degrade, it's an organic material, it degrades, it decomposes. Well, what does it decompose into? Well, it decomposes into its component parts, usually by a biological process. And the result of that biological process is emission, in most parts, of methane. Methane is one of the strongest greenhouse gases we've got. Sure. So when you're decomposing bioplastics, you're doing your part, obviously, to keep the material out of the waste in the water, in the oceans, and in the landfill. But over time, as that degrades, you're contributing to greenhouse gases. So it's a mixed blessing with the bioplastics.
That's interesting. Now, you mentioned a moment ago that up to $120 billion in value is being put in the ground. Does this process work with plastic that's already been landfilled? And if so, could we see an industry of landfill mining starting to develop?
That is a great question. It's something that we would love to see. What that's going to mean is there's going to have to be a pretty big effort expended at the front end to clean that material up for just the reasons we've touched on before. That, when you get stuff in a landfill, generally it's going to be very wet. It's going to have a lot of other materials on it, but the plastic remains the same. And the plastic is great. I mean, if we can mine those landfills, and there's actually a couple places around in the United States where there are dedicated plastics landfills that were put in place years ago when they didn't have any outlet for them. So yes, I think that is a possibility. There could be mining of these landfills. We just have to get better at being able to economically clean that plastic up once we get it out.
So we just have a moment or two left. Can you share what your vision for plastic is, say, in 2030? Or is it going to be circular at scale? And if not, what's the time frame and what do we need to do to get there?
As someone in this industry, I want nothing more than to see the chemical recycling grow, because I think it offers a huge promise and a huge opportunity as a civilization or as a society that uses plastic to beneficially handle this material in a responsible manner. And that's the key is, people, we were trained to throw plastics out. When plastics first came out, that was their big thing, is that you can use them and then throw them away and never think about them again. Well, now that's coming back to bite us. So, yeah. I think the potential is there. I think more companies like ours need to be successful and need to be founded on the same principles of, sustainability that this whole industry is trying to, envision. So it does have promise. It's got a long way to go. This is hard. It's new for us. It's new for everybody to make this work on an economic basis. But I think the potential does exist. I think the willpower is there with the brand owners. Certainly the petrochemical companies want to see this happen because they know that oil's not around forever. And they've got to pivot to a more sustainable model to be relevant. Simple as that. It's economic. Whether we can do it in time is tough, but there's also a huge element in terms of people assuming some responsibility. Plastics don't put themselves in the ocean. People put them there. People put them into the landfill. They put them into the environment. So people need to handle plastics as if they were a resource, not as a waste. And I think that's a fundamental shift in thinking that we're going to have to nurture and promote. And over time, if we say the message long enough and often enough, that will get through to people, and it will make a difference in how this whole thing plays out. And, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see into the future, but it's certainly something that I would like to see happen. Plastics are here. They're part of every person's life. They bring about huge benefits. But as we've seen, and the reason we're talking, they also carry a huge liability. So, we've just got to all work as a society to improve on that.
Well, Jeff, I think that's a great place to stop the conversation, but I want to have you come back and talk about this some more, because we opened a number of doors where there are long conversations to have. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Mitch, and really wish the best for you.
Thank you. We've been talking with Jeff Gold, the founder and CEO of nexus-fuels. You can learn more about nexus-fuels at www.nexus-fuels.com. Jeff brought up a really important point, that we only came up with the idea of circularity in 2002. William McDonough in Cradle to Cradle introduced the idea, and it's going to take some time for us to digest it and incorporate it into our daily lives. But hopefully we're doing a little of that here today, folks. And I would ask you all to share this podcast or other elements of the Earth911 information that you enjoy with your friends, so that we can spread the word. This is a mission that we're all on, to get ahead of the problems that we have created for ourselves. So we're going to be back, of course, with another innovator interview soon. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. Folks, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.